Create effective visual hierarchies. Another important way to make pages easy to grasp in a hurry is to make sure that the appearance of the things on the page of the visual cues accurately. Portray the relationships between the things on the page, which things are most important, which things are similar, and which things are part of other things. In other words, each page should have a clear visual hierarchy. Pages with a clear visual hierarchy have three traits. The more important something is, the more prominent it is. The most important elements are either larger, bolder, in a distinctive color, set off by more white space, or nearer the top of the page as some combination of the above. Things that are related logically are related visually. For instance, you can show that things are similar by grouping them together under a heading, displaying them in the same visual style, or putting them all in a clearly defined area. There's nothing new about visual hierarchies. Every newspaper page, for instance, uses prominence, grouping, and nesting to give us useful information about the contents of the page before we read a word. This picture goes with this story because they're both stunned by this headline. This story is the most important because it has the biggest headline and a prominent position on the page. We all pass visual hierarchies every day, but it happens so quickly that the only time we're even vaguely aware that we're doing it is when we can't do it, when the visual cues or absence of them force us to think. A good visual hierarchy saves us work by pre-processing the page for us, organizing and prioritizing its contents in a way that we can grasp almost instantly. But when a page doesn't have a clear visual hierarchy, everything looks equally important. For instance, or reduced to the much slower process of scanning the page for revealing words and phrases and then trying to form our own sense of what's important and how things are organized. It's a lot more work. Parsing a page with a visual hierarchy that's even slightly flawed, where a heading stuns things that aren't part of it. For instance, like reading a carelessly constructed sentence: Bill put the cat on the table for a minute because it was a little wobbly. This flawed visual hierarchy suggests that all the major sections of the site are part of the computer books subsection. Putting the heading where it belongs makes the relationship clearer. Even though we can usually figure out what the sentence is supposed to mean, it still throws us momentarily and forces us to think when we shouldn't have to. Break up pages into clearly defined areas. Ideally, on any well-designed web page, users can play a variation of the old TV game show 25,000 Pyramid. One glancing around. They should be able to point at the different areas of the page and say, "Things I can do on this site. Links to today's top stories. Products this company sells. Things they're eager to sell me. Navigation to get to the rest of the site." One contestants had to get their partners to guess a category like things a plumber uses by giving them examples: a wrench, a pipe cutter, hands that won't stay up. Dividing the page into clearly defined areas is important because it allows users to decide quickly which areas of the page to focus on and which areas they can safely ignore. Eye-tracking studies of web page scanning suggest that users decide very quickly in their initial glances which parts of the page are likely to have useful information and then rarely look at the other parts almost as though they weren't there. Banner blindness: ability of users to completely ignore areas they think will contain and see just the extreme case. Two people also rely on the fact that the cursor in a web browser changes from an arrow to a hand when you point it at a link, but this requires deliberately moving the cursor around. A relatively slow process. Also, it doesn't work on touch screens because they don't have a cursor. This process of looking for clues in the appearance of things that tell us how to use them isn't limited to web pages. As Don Norman explains so enjoyably in his recently updated usability classic The Design of Everyday Things. We're constantly parsing our environment like the handles on doors for these clues to decide whether to pull or push. Read it. You'll never look at doors the same way again. Easily identifying what's clickable on a page has waxed and waned as a problem since the beginning of the web. It's currently resurfacing as an issue in mobile design, though, as you'll see in Chapter 10. In general, you'll be fine if you just stick to one color for all text links or make sure that their shape and location identify them as clickable. Just don't make silly mistakes like using the same color for links and non-clickable headings. Keep the noise down to a dull roar. One of the great enemies of easy-to-grasp pages is visual noise. Users have varying tolerances for complexity and distractions. Some people have no problem with noisy pages, but many find them downright annoying. Users have even been known to put post-its on their screen to cover up animation that's distracting them while they are trying to read. There are really three different kinds of noise. Shouting. When everything on the page is clamoring for your attention, the effect can be overwhelming. Lots of invitations to buy. Lots of exclamation points, different typefaces, and bright colors. Automated slideshows, animation, pop-ups, and the never-ending array of new attention-grabbing ad formats. The truth is, everything can't be important. Shouting is usually the result of a failure to make tough decisions about which elements are really the most important and then create a visual hierarchy that guides users to them first. Disorganization. Some pages look like a room that's been ransacked, with things strewn everywhere. This is a sure sign that the designer doesn't understand the importance of using grids to align the elements on a page. Clutter. We've all seen pages, especially home pages, that just have too much stuff. The net effect is the same as when your email inbox is flooded with things like newsletters from sites that have decided that your one contact with them has made you lifelong friends. It's hard to find and focus on the messages you actually care about. You end up with what engineers call a low format text to support scanning much of the time. Perhaps most of the time that users spend on your web pages is spent scanning the text in search of something. The way your text is formatted can do a lot to make it easier for them. Which one would you rather scan? Here are the most important things you can do to make your pages scan-friendly. Use plenty of headings. Well-written, thoughtful headings interspersed in the text act as an informal outline or table of contents for a page. They tell you what each section is about, or, if they're less literal, they intrigue you. Either way, they help you decide which parts to read, scan, or skip. In general, you'll want to use more headings than you think and put more time into writing them. Also, be sure to format headings correctly. Two very important things about the styling of headings that people often overlook. If you're using more than one level of heading, make sure there's an obvious, impossible to miss visual distinction between them. You can do this by making each high level larger or by leaving bad. Better, even more important, don't let your headings float. Make sure they're closer to the section they introduce than to the section they follow. This makes a huge difference. Bad. Better keep paragraphs short. Long paragraphs confront the reader with what Caroline Jarrett and Ginny Reddish call a wall of words. They're daunting, they make it harder for readers to keep their place. And they're harder to scan than a series of shorter paragraphs. You may have been taught that each paragraph has to have a topic sentence, detail sentences, and a conclusion, but reading online is different. Even single-sentence paragraphs are fine. If you examine a long paragraph, you'll almost always find that there's a reasonable place to break it into. Get in the habit of doing it. Use bulleted lists. Think of it this way: almost anything that can be a bulleted list probably should be. Just look at your paragraphs for any series of items separated by commas or semicolons and you'll find likely candidates. And for optimal readability, there should be a small amount of additional space between the items in the list. Bad. Better highlight key terms. Much page scanning consists of looking for keywords and phrases. Formatting the most important ones in bold where they first appear in the text makes them easier to find. If they are already text links, you obviously don't have to. Don't highlight too many things, though, or the technique will lose its effectiveness. If you really want to learn about making content scannable or about anything related to writing for screens in general, run, do not walk. To an internet-connected device and order Ginny Reddish's book Letting Go of the Words. And while you're at it, order a copy for anyone you know who writes, edits, or has anything to do with creating digital content. He'll end up eternally indebted to you. Why users like mindless choices. It doesn't matter how many times I have to click, as long as each click is a mindless, unambiguous quiz. Krug's second law of usability. Web designers and usability professionals have spent a lot of time over the years debating how many times you can expect users to click or tap to get what they want without getting too frustrated. Some sites even have design rules stating that it should never take more than a specified number of clicks. Usually 3, 4, or 5 to get to any page in the site. On the face of it, number of clicks to get anywhere seems like a useful metric. But over time I've come to think that what really counts is not the number of clicks it takes me to get to what I want. Although there are limits, but rather how hard each click is, the amount of thought required and the amount of uncertainty about whether I'm making the right choice. In general, I think it's safe to say that users don't mind a lot of clicks as long as each click is painless and they have continued confidence that they are on the right track following what's often called the scent of information. One links that clearly and unambiguously identify their target give off a strong scent that assures users that clicking them will bring them nearer to their prey. Ambiguous or poorly worded links do not. This term comes from Peter Pirelli and Stuart Card's information foraging research at Xerox PARC, in which they drew parallels between people seeking information in formables and animals following the scent of their prey. I think the rule of thumb might be something like 3 mindless, unambiguous clicks equal 1 click that requires thought. 2. Of course, there are exceptions. For instance, if I'm going to have to drill down through the same path in a site repeatedly, or if the pages are going to take a long time to load, then the value of fewer clicks increases. The classic first question in the word game 20 questions, animal, vegetable, or mineral, is a wonderful example of a mindless choice. As long as you accept the premise that anything that's not a plant or an animal, including things as diverse as pianos, limericks, and cheesecake, for instance. Falls under mineral. It requires almost no thought to answer the question correctly. 3. 3. In case you've forgotten the game, there's an excellent version that you can play against at www.20q.net. Created by Robin Bergener, it uses a neural net algorithm and plays a mean game. Unfortunately, many choices on the web aren't as clear. For example, as recently as a few years ago when I was trying to buy a product or service to use in my home office like a printer, for instance. Most of the manufacturer's sites asked me to make a top-level choice like this. Metered mail with a business reply card in my hand. What do they think it is, stamped or metered? And what happens if I drop it in the wrong box? Here's another example. In trying to read an article online, the page I arrive at gives me all these options. Now I've got to scan all this text and work out whether I'm a subscriber but not a member, or a member, or neither one. And then you'll have to dig up the account number or the password that I used or decide whether it's worth joining. At this point, the question I'm asking myself is probably changing from how do I answer this question to just how interested am I in this article. The New York Times makes the same kind of choice seem much easier by not confronting you with all the details at once. Making an initial selection to log in or to see your options for subscribing takes you to another screen where you see only the relevant questions or information for that selection. This problem of giving the user difficult choices and questions that are hard to answer happens all the time in forms. Caroline Jarrett has an entire chapter about it, making questions easy to answer in her book Forms That Work, Designing Web Forms for Usability. As with Ginny Reddish's book about writing for the web, anyone who works on forms should have a well-worn copy sitting on their desk. Some assistance may be required. Life is complicated, though, and some choices really aren't simple. When you can't avoid giving me a difficult choice, you need to go out of your way to give me as much guidance as I need but no more. London. It's brief, look right and an arrow pointing right. Timely, you see.